The subject of mystical aspect of creation and the subject of the Maaseh Merkava, the secret, esoteric Ezekiel involvement with the chariot, the world above, the world below, the pleroma around God, the anthropomorphic aspect of the Almighty, and the idea of the process of creation will occupy our second part of this study today, since we are planning first to complete this first chapter in Tractate Chagigah. So we are 12 lines from the top of the page 11. The Mishnah tells us, Mikra mu'ad ve'alachot merubot. If you remember yesterday, we said in the Mishnah that there are certain phrases, certain statements in the Torah that you do not have a specification. You see a very succinct, a very short phrase, statement, commandment, yet there are endless, there are tremendous amount of nuances and halachot, meaning practical Jewish law, that is derivative by the oral teaching. And we use the three statements in a Mishnah that applies to three components. If you remember yesterday, first one is Shabbat. Yes, there are statements about Shabbat, but all the specification of the 39 type of work and the consequences of those work, what allow, what not, who, what, where, when, and how. The same is Hagigah, the festival offering. And the third one we discussed yesterday is the law of Me'ilah, misuse of consecrated property, which, as we said yesterday, there are many applications to our lives. As an example, if someone contributed something to an institution, for example, someone contributed something to the synagogue, and it's left over or it's not in use, can one allow to go ahead and have a personal use for those consecrated properties? So we said Tana negaim ve'ahulot mikra muat ve'alachot merubot. It's not only these three. There are others, such as the idea of negaim, the law of the leprosy. The Torah tells us all the nuances of someone who have these dermatology issues with skins, etc., skin diseases, and the law involved with a corpse in the tent, meaning in very short, if there is a corpse, all those people who occupy the place that carries a roof are basically contagious to the law of rendering ritual impurity. So to say it in short, mikra mu'at ve'halachot merubot. The Torah tells us a short line, but there are many halachot. Negaim mikra mu'at, the Gemara asked. Is that true? When it's come to law of leprosy, they are just a short statement? Come on. Negaim mikra merubeu. If you read in Leviticus, chapters 13 and 14, you see a lot in the Torah about the law of leprosy. So why you said it's short? Amar Rav Papa, Hagigah amar. Negaim mikra meruba v'alachot muatot, u'alot mikra muat v'alachot merubot. You know what does that mean? When it's come to the law of leprosy, the Torah elaborates. And therefore the consequences, we are clearer with the halachot. So it's relatively small halachot, since the Torah gave us the broader concept of law of leprosy. But in that sense, we have also the big subject of ritual impurity involved with the corpse. The Torah was short, but the halachot are many, so it can go in both ways. So my nafkamina. So why you need to go and say it? Im istapka lach minka benegaim ayen bekrai. Well, if you have an issue of the law of leprosy, go straight to the Torah and see what it's written. Okay? the book called Meromei Sadeh gives us examples of that. ואם מסתפקא לך מינתא בעולות, עיין במתניתין. But if you have an issue of the law of corpse that rendering ritual impurity, go to our Mishnah, to our old teaching, and you see all the practical halachot. Dinim, so the Mishnah said, when it's come to a law of monitoring, and as you know, my son-in-law is study to be Dayan. So involvement with that, you have to be extremely erudite, because there are, first of all, it's a monetary issue between man and his fellow, but it's a lot to study. So you have some foundation in the written Torah, but Michtav Ktivan, there is text that it's written. So the Gemara said, Lo nitzrecha ela lichde Rabbi. So I explain in my book on Rashi, כלומר יש בהם דברים שאינם מפורשים בפירוש, כגון זה וכיוצא בה. Meaning that you do have something in the Torah, but even you dig in the Torah, there is so much to cover. The Tanya, we learn in the Torah, the Torah said, when is a case like two men are fighting. Book of Exodus chapter 21. And while they are fighting, guess what happened? Is a woman involved there, and unfortunately, guess what? She was hit by one of them. And there are many scenarios, but let's say if she was pregnant and she miscarried the baby, okay? Or there are two people who are fighting and they intend to kill each other, and by mistake, one was so mad, instead of killing his enemy, he killed that lady. Happened? Yes, it happened. So Rabbi Omer, when the Torah used the term nefesh tachat nefesh, soul in exchange of soul, do not think for a second of the code of Hammurabi. I assume that we all know what I mean, right? Eddie, code of Hammurabi, remember we studied it? Mm-hmm. Hammurabi code is all these ancient tribes that interpreted the literal text as paying back in the same manner. Someone cut your hand, you should cut his hand. Someone take your eye, you should take his eye, right? Eye for eye. That's not Judaism. So here is an example. Doesn't mean by Torah law that if Mr. Reuven wants to kill Mr. Shimon, and by mistake Mrs. Eve was in the wrong place in the wrong time, and she was hit, doesn't mean that now because Reuven hits her instead of Shimon, you need to kill Reuven in exchange, okay? So the Torah said instead, furthermore, let's continue with the logic thinking. Since the intent of Reuven was not to kill Eve, was to kill Shimon, right? So he needs mammon, he needs to pay the heir, the inheritors of that Eve, money, evaluation of money, venatata nefesh, you give the money, the assets, the property that has a monetary value in exchange of the loss of a soul. So, and Rashi elaborates and he quotes few texts that said that it's appraisal needs to come. In general, appraisal is basically you evaluate someone like we do in the modern days. You take the profession, you take several example, you make some type of evaluation of how much it's lost between now to the end of their life. It's a different kind of evaluation. That's a lot to discuss in the Tractate Bava Kama. But here they said, Ata Omer Mamon. He wants to base his explanation and teaching. So he said, you meant to say when the Torah said soul for soul, meaning money? Oy no ela nefesh mamash. Maybe you say that Reuven killed Eve, let's kill Reuven. That's Hammurabi code, right? They said, no. You remember the 13 principles of Rabbi Ishmael that we said every day, and we mentioned that yesterday? The second principle, it's called Gzeira Shava. One of our teaching is by taking verbal analogy and juxtapose the same text in two places, and we learn Emra netina lemata venatata. Natata, you see the language? Latet, meaning to give. The Torah said, give soul for soul. Venemra netina lemala. In the earliest line, the early verse, they said, if one man hits a pregnant woman, and as a result of that hit, she miscarried that baby, he needs venatan biflilim. He needs to give a monetary value of those babies, of that miscarriage. Okay? Ma lehalan mamon afkan mamon. The same way as over there we said that it's applied to monetary payment, here too it's a monetary payment. Avodot, also another subject, which is the offering. Michtav ktiva. The Torah said clearly the what's involved with the offering, with sacrificial offering. So he said, Lo nitzrecha ela lolachat adam, the Tanya. Part of that ritual is to carry that blood. The Torah said in Leviticus chapter 1, V'ikrivu, zo kabbalat adam v'abka rachmana bilshon holacha. That even it's a receive, the one who received the blood, but it's considering holacha, that it carry them to the altar. V'abka rachmana bilshon holacha dichtiv. So why you don't say Kabbalah? Why you say holacha? So they said dichtiv v'ikriv hakohen et hakol v'iktir hamizbecha, because they said that the Kohen take the incense, all of them, wrap it up and put it in the altar. V'amarmar. So we learned in that's well-known Braita, but it's also important to see Tractate Chagigah, page 65. They said zo olachat evarim lakeves. So which means, since it's written later, Rashi said v'iktir hamizbecha, that's the carry those limbs. So Rashi said he can stand next to the altars. That's not the idea of holacha. So it means you have here in the Mishnah all the valid specification of that service as a point of lismoch, meaning you can have it as a support source. Next part in the Mishnah, we need to have some introduction. The next part is called taharot, the law of way that a person can take away the ritual impurity. So the idea is, and just introduction for those who are not so familiar, and please stop me if it's not clear, because it's important to comprehend the subject, and we discuss it many times. We know that by Torah law there is a requirement to have mikveh. Mikveh meaning ducking a person in the water in order to remove for him or from her a rendering ritual impurity. The idea is there are different categories of ritual impurity, such as highest level if someone touch a corpse, because a corpse is considering the highest level of ritual impurity. Another category is women in the menstruation. That time is a change on her physical body, and after that the Torah requires, it's not rabbinic, it's the Torah. The Torah said if one does not that soul shall be cut off. So it's serious Torah law that she need to duck herself after that, and then her husband can have relation. It's biblically prohibited to have relation while she's in that time before cleaning herself. There are others, such as a discharge from men or from women situations. etc., etc. Now, with all that said, we may ask, how about using the ocean? How about using a sprint moving water? We are blessed with not only bay and ocean, but there are lakes too. But Gilbert will tell you that there are lakes that they are standing, right? And there are lakes of water that are moving, constantly moving. So here we are. We go by understanding basically three categories. The first category, it's called Mei Ma'ayan. You remember Ma'ayan?
Yeah.
Okay, Mei Ma'ayan. Ma'ayan meaning, it's called in Ivrit, Maim Zochalim. You have water there, and the water is moving, constantly moving, right? You see it in the lakes, in different lakes, not everyone, but you see lakes that 24/7, it's all the time moving, right? There are lakes, you see it in places, okay? Now, in that sense, there is a concept of minimum, it's called 40 se'ah, which means amount of water that a person can duck himself and his entire body will be within that domain of, it's called 40 se'ah, it's a certain measurement of amount of water. So as long as he duck himself in that amount while the water are not standing, zochalim are moving water, then by ducking he is okay, he's ritually pure after ducking himself, making sure that the entire body has no chatzitza, which means he's not carrying his watch, he's not having a bathing suit, right? If he's she doesn't have a big nails, etc., cosmetic things, total pure body, ducking himself, the water are flowing water, and the moment he is out, while his entire body is there, he's ritually impure. So that's first category. It's called Maim Zochalim. The second one, it's called Mei Gshamim, which means you have a raining water. Raining water. So what is that raining water? For example, if you go to the bay or you go to a river, so you see they have raining water, but not every river or every one of those lakes carries a raining water. Sometimes it's collection. In order for us to build a community mikveh, we need to have bore, meaning a cistern, and in that cistern needs to have which called ashboren. Ashboren meaning it's a collection of raining water that a person can go there inside and have the size which call again 40 se'ah, 40 se'ah cubits. David later will tell you what is exactly the measurement with water. But the idea is, as far as the square, it's a half square meter. If you take the square, that's the minimum, and the height, it's again by half, that's the minimum. But I know in the Israeli measurement, it's called meter v'chetzi gova, which means 1.5 meter in the heights, that's the minimum. So the idea is that average person can duck himself comfortably. Now, you ask a question. So how about if I have in my home tub or jacuzzi, right? There are people who have that, right? Not me, but, right? There are people who have it. In new development, there are people who have it, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say you have that tub. Why you cannot use it as a mikveh? The answer is you have there a hole. And the hole has a pkak, something that sealed it, right? So because you have that, it's not totally sealed, lo atum, and therefore is a problem. Number one. Number two problem, it's not a raining water. Remember, that's part of our requirement. Mm-hmm. Now we'll go to the third category, which is the ocean, or just one of those rivers that you're not sure if it's a spring water or not. So the answer is since it's not מים שאובים, because it's not coming from מי מעיין or מי גשמים, it's not clear to you if it's a raining water, if it's a spring water. So there is a plus and minus, and it's not so simple to say that you just go to the ocean and duck yourself. As I said earlier, the best is if you have community mikveh and that's it. But in general, the plus is that it's most probably partially raining water or partially moving spring water, okay? But it's also chisaron, it's also downside with it, which is if most of the water are clearly flowing water, then it's okay. But if all the water is solely raining water, it's a problem. So it's all depend upon the season, and you have to ask all the time an expert to make sure that it's not only raining water. So with that said, now we see our discussion.
Is tidal flow considered moving?
What?
Tidal flow considered movement?
What does that mean?
From the tides.
From
In the ocean, because of the tides. They move. The water is constantly moving in the ocean, always. All the water, because of the tides.
Okay, I said, if someone asks, I don't want to mention names, but you know what I'm talking about, and they said, we still do not have a permanent mikveh here.
Right.
So for sure, if it's issue of karet, you tell the person, go to the ocean and duck yourself, and that's it. But lechatchila, you have to make sure, as I said, that it's not only raining water. So if it's a flowing water, that's constantly zochalim, then you can use it. But as I said again, lechatchila, it's better to make sure you have something that have the combination of the two. Okay? So the Mishnah said, Michtav Ktiv, so Gemarrah said, it's written, which means the Torah said it clearly. Why you need to say that you just, the written Torah have the support of that view? Lo nitzrecha ela leshiur mikveh. The reason we have that, it's because, and how beautiful is it to have this discussion while we're talking about our mikveh of Annapolis to be built in Mitzvah Shem soon. So they said the minimum measure of the ritual bath, the lo ktiva, because this is something that we derive from the text, but it's not written clearly in the text. Here is the source. The Tanya verachatz et besaro verachaz b'mayim et kol besaro. The Torah said that someone have a discharge, so he shall bath in a flesh in water. So what does that mean? They said b'mei mikveh, because the Torah said with bet, open bet. Okay, they said rachat ba mayim, not be mayim. So it means not every, look how deep is the Torah, that it's not every water, but you have to have a specific designated water that is called the water of mikveh, of ritual bath. Meaning, if you have mayim she'uvim, if you have that type of water, you cannot use them for mikveh. Rashi tells us it's machloket. Rashi said that it cannot be mayim she'uvim. Tosfot said, how do you know that that's the meaning of mikveh? It means, Rashi said, לא זוחלי, תוספות said, היינו השבורים, דברים למעיים יותר בזוחלים, מקווה בהשבורן. So as we said, the whole idea is the cistern, that collection of raining water with other water, and that's the way you have. מים שכל גופו עולה בהם, which means you have to have a water that when you duck in, you have the whole body can center, which is average person. V'chamahen, how do you know? So now we give a rabbinic measurement. Ama al ama, berum shalosh amot. The water has to be cubit by 1 cubit, with the height of 3 cubits. As I said earlier, you go by the average person and you go by the minimum. Yet there are others who say that how about someone who's a heavy set, how about someone who's a high, but it's the Tashbets have a explanation further with that. ושיערו חכמים למקווה 40 סאה. So the rabbis have the measurement, which is the 40 cubits. It's a minimum value of water necessary for ritual bath. It is equivalent to, they said here, 80 hin, which is 5,660 egg bark. A 40 CR measure is based on all modern halachic calculation of a various measure of volume. According to the Nae scale, a ritual bath must contain 332 of water. The Chazon Ish is 573. Anyway, as I said earlier, there is a lot to discuss further. The two haven't tried to explain why the Torah did not say there are Ba'im Se'ayin and that's it. Anyway, next one is Tum'ot. When it's come to ritual impurities, it is written, the law of ritual impurity. לא נצרכה אלא לחדשה מן השרץ דלא כתיבה. You speak about a lentil bark from a creeping animal, which is not written. Why you use that? It's like a internet facsimile, that the minute, it's small, tiny, creeping animal. So now, remember, when it's come to ritual impurity, it makes no difference if it's a camel or a size of almost a lice, as long as it's a ritual impurity. So we measure the minimum, and the minimum is the size of lentil bark from a creeping animal. Detanya, Bahem Yachol Bechulam. You may think that the Torah meant to say that if you touch, only if you see a full creeping animal and you touch it, then you become ritually impure. But Talmud lomar mehem. Mehem, every word has a meaning. It means even a minute part of that creeping animal. Yachol b'miktzatan. Maybe you meant to say just small part. Talmud lomar bahem haketzad. עד שיגיע במקצתו שהוא ככולו, until he touches some of it, that it's like a whole, which means you have a significant amount. שיערו חכמים בחדשה. The sages come in and estimated for us this measure as a size of a lentil bark. That's the size. שכן חומת, because חומת, which is the smallest of these creeping animals, Chomet is the mentioned in Torah. It's one of the list of 8 creeping, ritually impure creeping animals. It's Leviticus 11. We don't know for sure. Some say that it's chilazon. Rav Saadia Gaon said that it's a lizard. Anyway, some say that it's others. Anyway, it's snail. So they said, שכן חומת, תחילתו בחדשה. רבי יוסי בר יהודה אומר, כי זנבה לטאה. רבי יוסי בר יהודה said is the size of the lizard's tail, which consider a part that is like a whole. So what's the point? Remember the other day we talked about rooster, when he loses his head. The body is still moving for a short time, right? So here you talk about the lizard's tail. The tail of the lizard can be cut off easily, and it continues to twist even after it has been cut off. So it has the appearance of a life. So as a result, it is fitting to label it as a part that is like the whole. Next one is the subject of arayot. It's a subject of prohibited sexual relation, and we mentioned that it's written clearly, explicitly in the Torah. We read it on Yom Kippur afternoon, right? It said Michtav Ktivin. It's written. Lo nitzrecha, it's necessary, ela 11b. So they said lebito me'anusato. Listen carefully, please. The Torah said in the book of Leviticus chapter 18 it's a list that we read on Yom Kippur of relation that prohibited. What does that mean, prohibited? Some examples. A person has a second marriage and is a child that comes from the previous marriage of his wife, which means, let's say Mr. A married Mrs. B, and Mrs. B have children from her previous marriage. Mr. A are prohibited biblically to have relation with the children of Mrs. B, that it's now his wife. Or another concept, if you have a child that come from a woman that it's not his wife, which is, for example, if a person convince someone or involved with a rape case, right, and have a illegitimate child, so even it's not written clearly, Rashi said, the ilu bito meishto ktiva ervat isha bita. When it's come to a child from his wife, previous life, it's written in the Torah, mashma ben shabat mimeno, meaning regardless if is a relationship between father and daughter that prohibited by the Torah law, ben meish acher, even it's a daughter of his wife from a different man. Okay,
this includes all the forbidden relationships as well, the ones that are forbidden biblically.
Yeah,
as
but
well. So it includes those as well,
here,
but and others.
Yes, but the idea is the Torah gives us a list, Rashi said, but we derive from the Torah, as the Gemara said in Yevamot 97, that there are others that it's not in the text, but it's derivative from the text, that it's prohibited. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So they said the lo ktiva, because the Torah did not say that clearly, but we derive from the text. Amar Rava, Amar li Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi, Atya hena hena. That we learn a verbal analogy from the word hena, that it's written twice in Leviticus 18:17, in Leviticus 18:10, which means that every daughter, even from the rape of a woman who is not one's wife, is prohibited, just like one's daughter from his wife. So if Mr. A marry Mrs. B, and she have a daughter from a raping relation of a previous life, that daughter is prohibited to him, even it's not his biological daughter. That's derivative indirectly from the text. And Atya, Zima, Zima, because we learn further on the word Zima meaning loudness. It's written twice, Leviticus 18:17 and Leviticus 20:14. So since it's written twice, the punishment is sreifa, which means it applies the same way as we said that a person is prohibited to have relation with his granddaughter. So the same applies also to the daughter and granddaughter of his wife's previous life's children. Which means we understand that the person's married to a wife that have children from a previous life. We understand that the child is prohibited. But we derive also the grandchild from that situation also. And we derive also that in regard to punishment is the same punishment, which is the category of sreifa, which means it's all wrapped up in the Gemarrah in Yevamot, page 3, which we will study. Hen gufei Torah, the Mishnah concluded that this is the essence, this is the essential part of the Torah. So Gemara said, only this is essence, others not. They said, no, ela hen vehen gufei Torah. We, in traditional Judaism, did not differentiate between written Torah, oral Torah, all this, it's not part of. What we said is that regardless if you have a direct source in the Torah, or it's our derivative from the tradition that transmitted orally, it's all wrapped up in a concept of this is the essential part of the Torah. הדרן הלך הכל חייבים. פרק שני, second chapter in Mitzvah. Now, if you look at the Tiferet Israel, it's one of the interpretations of the Mishnah. So he concluded the first perek, and he started the third perek, because he feels that this Mishnah is continuation of the previous one. Ratzui shelo ba la'olam. Anyway, the Mishnah starts with the concept of Dorshin, and the same as Melamdim. Drasha, in general, is public speaking. Melamed is to teach, right? But the derivative is the same. En dorshin ba'arayot bishlosha. We are not learn and not expose the topic of forbidden sexual relation before 3 or more individuals. Rashi said, Shnaim vehu, the person and another 2. Meaning, the teacher cannot teach 2 students that they are together bishlosha. They are together 3. Later we explain why. Next one, velo b'maaseh bereshit. And also we're not teaching the whole story of act of creation and the secret of the beginning of the world. So we know that there is a concept of membeit otiyot, the 42, number 42 that involve with name, etc. But the idea is the Torah ishtalshelut, how the creation happened, what happened before and during and after, or Reb Chaim Volozhin said, how, like the famous story of the Golem of Prague, you remember that story? That was a great rabbi who was able to build, quote unquote, a human with a combination of name of Hashem, which is way above us. So Reb Chaim Volozhin explains that this is something you don't teach, you don't share, you don't involve other people. What to do and how to do and what's the involvement of taking the sacred, the sacred and the secret name of God and combine Torah Tzerufim. It was a rabbi of the 11th century, his name is Rabbi Abulafia, great Sephardic rabbi. He wrote a book and it was a big cherem against that. That in that book he tried to give all kind of combinations of name of God and things that you can create with knowing those formula. The rabbis opposed it vehemently, right? It's not for public. Bishnayim, right? You don't do that. Velo b'merkava. And also the secret of the chariot, the divine chariot, the mystical teaching with regard to the way of God conduct the world. That's from the Ezekiel. Whoever knows those materials, you don't share it, right? So the whole description of Ezekiel chapter 1, he saw the heaven open and he saw all those chariot and the entities, and you see it also in the Chronicles chapter 28. It's something, the cherubim in the Beit HaMikdash, all these things, it's not to share with public. It's the secret document in Judaism. And he said, Beyachid, even individual, Ela im ken, the only condition a person can be involved with this, Haya chacham umevin mida'ato. He is a very erudite person, he's a Torah scholar, and understands most matter on his own. What does that mean? So the Rambam said in a Guide for the Perplexed, in chapter 33, that it means that there are 2 conditions. Number 1, it needs to be the scholar, which means you have all this background of physics, and theology and philosophy, etc., etc. to be the wisdom, and also that he have such a level of understanding that even the teacher said one line, he already grasped all the secret behind that statement. Meaning, this is, if you know, if you'll involve this, it has to be betzin'ah. It has to be in a hidden way, otherwise, alul le'avim michshol, it can stumble people, etc. So, for example, the idea of God's pleroma, meaning gods, and around him there is entities and chariots, and what exactly involved, we said every day, va'ofanim v'chayot HaKodesh, those around God. So it's like you take a secret from the king, you take a sensitive, confidential materials and promulgated it to public. It can create a lot of distractions, oppose it. And now the Mishnah go next and said that there is a limitation for researchers. כל המסתכל בארבעה דברים, anyone who dig in subject, 4 subjects, whoever looks at 4 matters, רטוי לו כאילו בא לעולם. רטוי, Rashi said, it's like we should have a mercy, compassion on him, because he's going to be punished for that. Tosfot disagree, and he said, רטוי לו, it means what happened above, what happened below, but the idea is, it's better for him כאילו לא בא לעולם, that he never entered this world. מה למעלה, מה למטה, what above this world, the firmament, what is below the earth, which means, the Rashi said, the idea of the head of those animals, what is below those animals, what's involved with the chariot, the divine providence, which called Sovev Kol Almin, Memale Kol Almin, how is the divine providence is around the world, occupy the world, transcendental, and living God in those entities, and how those entities malefanim, maleachor, what is the before creation, what is after the end of the world. So again, what is above the firmament, what is out in the east, in the west, Rashi said. This is one of the things that it's like clairvoyant prophecy, what's going to happen and what happened in the past, searching in regression and searching the future. וכל שלא חס על כבוד קונו רטוי לו שלא בא לעולם. And one who has no concern for the honor of his maker, who inquires into and deals with a matter not permitted to him, deserves that he never come to the world. So the idea is, the Rambam explained to us, he said, look, we appreciate all God creatures, and we can train animals, for example. You can train monkey, but let's be honest, can monkey understand the subject of Lashon Hora, Elliot?
No.
The evil gossip. Can you explain that to monkey? No. You can explain to monkey how to run, how to hit, how to open, how to jump, even how to drive a car maybe, right? But you cannot explain to him the prohibition against evil gossip. Correct?
Yeah.
There are certain things that the person cannot understand. The Rambam in the introduction of Book of Science said, since we are created by the Creator limited, and only the Creator is unlimited, and by virtue of our limitation, we are limited. And since we intend to be limited, it's beyond our comprehension to understand the unlimited, because we are limited. So the limited can understand only the limited by his limitations, the Rambam said. But the limited will not be able to understand unlimited because he is so limited. Okay? So now we examine what the Mishnah said. אמרת ברישה ולא במרכבה ביחיד, והדר אמרת אם כן היה חכם ומבין מדעתו. Pick and choose. The first clause in the Mishnah, you said when it's come to a chariot, individually you shall not search it. But then he said, wait, but if he's an erudite and have the wisdom, etc., he can do that. So the Gemara said, you know what does that mean? Hagigah אמר. אין דורשים בעריות לשלושה. When it's come to all those laws involved with prohibit relations, you have to have, the Rambam said, at least 3 people, meaning 3 students. ולא במעשה בראשית לשניים, and not the creation for 2, ולא במרכבה ליחיד, in chariot individual, אלא אם כן היה חכם ומבין מדעתו. Rashi said, what does that mean? שלא יצטרך לשאול לרב כשיסתפק. לא. דלאו אורחה ערה לפירוש הבעדי. He says, this student is so familiar and erudite that he's not going to ask questions. Because this is one of those things that you either understand or you don't. You don't, it's not the nature, Rashi said, leperush haba'adei, that you go and it's, in a way, it's not in honor of God to tell the secret formula of the chariot to the masses. So, meaning the Rambam said that there are certain things that certain people understand. David will tell you. When it's come to assembly language of the program in IT, right? There are certain lines you can teach people. There are certain formula that you reach so high level, right? That it's for certain people. Not everyone can get it. You can start 5, 10 times, 20 times, but there are certain formula that it's beyond comprehension of average person. You have those things. So it happens. So at the moment you start, the Rambam said, using allegories and things like that, it loses its essence. אין דורשים בעריות בשלושה, מה איתמה? Why you don't teach the subject of the prohibit relations to 3? אילמה משום דכתיב איש איש את כל שערי בשרו, איש איש תרי שער בשרו חד. So the Torah said 2, and if the relatives is another, ואמר החמנה, לא תקרבו לגלות ערווה. The Torah said 3 together should not do it. Why? So Rashi said that you should not get together to search it, which means either you don't go to a teacher to tell you the secret, or the 2 plus 1. So you see in Yom Kippur, the highest moment in Yom Kippur, Mincha afternoon, right, Elliot? We read this, the arayos.
Yes.
Why you do that? So they said it's a lot of hamon sodot ba'arayot. There is a lot of secrets in the Torah. And what we learn is when it's come to Bereshit, when it's come to chariot, when it's come to those subjects, we are prohibited from searching too much with this. Me'ata, דכתיב איש איש כי יקלל אלוקיו, איש איש אשר ייתן מזרעו למולך. Molech is the name of the false god in Deuteronomy 18.
But you have that on Yom Kippur.
That people, pass to or those who bless, quote unquote, God. We're using the other way around, right? So they said, אלא אבחנו מים מבעלה לרבות את הנוכרים שמוזרים על ברכת השם. That apply also to non-Jews that prohibited to, quote unquote, bless God, right? It's not just for us. ועל עבודה הזרה בישראל, but also the idol worshiping that prohibited. היינה מבעלה לרבות הנוכרים שמוזרים על עריות בישראל. That when it's come to prohibit sexual relations, applies also to a non-Jews. Okay, that's one of the 7 Noahide laws. אלא מדכתיב ושמרתם משמרתי ושמרתם תרי משמרתי חי ואמר רחמן על בלתי הסוד ומלכות התועבות אלא מעתה דכתיב ושמרתם את השבת ושמרתם את המסורת ושמרתם משמרת הקודש אך אינמי. You may be thinking it's also for 2 people. I wish to have more time. אלא מרבשי מים דורשים בעריות בשלושה דורשים בסתרי עריות. You don't speak about the secret behind the text when it's come to that. Meaning, like, for example, Rabbeinu Hananel said here, all these dinim involved with some type of indirect prohibit relations, some type of oral kissing, etc. So you derive indirectly from the text, and it's applied to two אלה. אמר בשלושה, אין דורשים ברות בשלושה, אין דורשים בסדר בשלושה. מה איתמה? סבראו. בית רקיעת ורבי קמאיו, חד שקיל ותרא בעדי רבי, וידח צד מצלול לגמרא. תלת אחד שקיל ותרא בעדי רבי, ואנח תרי שקלו ותרו בעדי הדדי, ולא ידע מה כמה רבי, ואז למי שריסו בעריות. Beautiful. This is the first lesson in psychology. Right? You have two students. You can teach. You have one individual and two students can teach. But if you have three, guess what happened? Let's say David asked me a question. And while he asked me a question, Gilbert and Eddie start talking among themselves. Right? So guess what happened? The next thing happened is that Eddie or Gilbert will not hear clearly, and they make the rule by themselves because they're not part of my discussion with David. Right? So that's the reality of life. That's the way the Havaya said that that's only applied Talmudic time, that they're teaching by oral teaching. Nowadays you have books, it's different. But if you want to understand a little more about that, is when you start asking question, how come Cain married his sister? Okay? Or how come Yaakov married two sisters? And all kind of questions when it's come to Arayot that you don't teach it public in such a manner. But again, as I said, Ravaya said that nowadays it's different. So Yacham B'Kol Torah Nami, so if that's the case, so it's applied to the entire Torah that you should not teach three. Arayot shani, Arayot is different. אמר מר גזל ועריות נפשו של אדם, נפשו מחמלתן ומתהווה להם. So again, this is a lesson in psychology. What happened is that people have a different attitude when it's come to this. יחי גזל נעמי עריות בין בפניו בין שלא בפניו נפיש יצרי. גזל בפניו נפיש יצרי, שלא בפניו נפיש יצרי. They said when it's come to prohibit relations, a person have it in his mind all the time. Right? So therefore he tried to be more lenient because it's a big temptation, big evil inclination. Versus when it's come to steal, that's only when it's appear before the person. But if you learn from his Rebbe, he will be careful not to do it. ולא מעשה בראשית בשניים מנענה מילי. Why you don't learn the creation with two? ותנו רבנן תשאלנה על ימים ראשונים בסד in Deuteronomy 4, יחיד שואל ואין שניים שואלים. יכול לשאול אדם קודם שנברא העולם. Maybe a person deal with what happened before creation. תלמוד לומר, ומן היום השם ברא אלוהים אדם על הארץ. Only when it's a beginning of creation. יכול לו ישאל אדם מששת ימי בראשית. Maybe, as you know, a person was born, now we're getting close to the creation, 25th day of Elul, and then the creation of the first man, which is the 6th day. תלמוד לומר, לרבים ראשונים היו לפניך. יכול לשאול אדם מה למעלה ומה למטה, מה לפנים ולאחור, what happened before. So Tosfot explained, outside of the firmament is the east to the west. Before and after, that's first. מקצה השמיים, it's outside of the firmament. So not before the creation, what exactly happened after the creation. תלמוד לומר, מקצה השמיים, מקצה השמיים, מקצה השמיים, מקצה השמיים אתה שואל, ואתה שואל מה למעלה, מה למטה, מה לפנים, מה לאחור. So it means you are limited with those researchers. You are limited that you may ask, but you may not ask what is above, what is below, what is before, and what is after. Page 12, השתד נפקא למקצה השמיים מהקצה השמיים, למן יום שברא אלוקים אדם על הארץ, למה לי? So why you need to elaborate from the day that the first man created רבי אלעזר, אמר רבי אלעזר, אדם הראשון מן הארץ על הרקיע, שנאמר למן יום שברא אלוהים שמע אדם על הארץ. וכיוון שסרח, נהיה הקדוש ברוך הוא ידע אליו ומיעטו, שנאמר אחור וקדם צרתני ודע שלא יכפרה. So again, you can take it two different ways. Either that man was very, very high, above our understanding, or it means that he was able to understand 100 times or 1,000 times more than the current capability. So it's like two different creation. One is highest, one is lowest. אמר רב יהודה אמר רב, אדם הראשון מסוף העולם ועד סופו היה. It's like from the one side or the other. So the Tzivu Volozhin said, ותשל עלי כפיך, ותשל עלי כפיך, you reduce me. You reduce. You are basically what's called tzimtzum. You take me from broader one and you make me more contracted, right? The small one. So they said, שנאמר למינו מה שברא אלוהים אדם על הארץ ומקצה השמיים וקצה השמיים, כיוון שסרח, when he made the mistake, הניח הקדוש ברוך הוא ידעו עליו ומידו שנאמר ודאי שלא יקפך. So he said, you fashioned me behind and before and laid your hand upon me. That's in Psalm 139, which means make him small. So again, there is one that said that that's not a literal simple understanding, and others said that that's the whole past and future. The Rambam tells us in Ilchot Yesodei Torah chapter 4, one may teach the act of creation to one student to the extent that he is able to grasp the topic. But the design of the divine chariot may be taught only in the form of outlines and only to a very erudite, wise scholar who capable of understanding of his own accord, as this matter cannot be fully comprehended by everyone. We learn also the concept, one of the 7 Noahide laws. The Noahide laws, the one we learn is the Rambam Ilchot Melachim chapter 9. If a Noahide engages in adultery, in its custom any manner, which is his in any form, he deserves mitah. A Noahide is in any form of idol worshipping, and he said it's also if he quote unquote bless God, is the same deserve mitah. Also 6 forbidden sexual relations apply to Noahides, which is one's mother, the wife of one's father, a married woman, one's maternal half-sister, males, and animals. All these 6 applies to Noahide, meaning this mitzvah, this commandment is not only for the Jews, but is one of the 7 universal Noahide laws. The last halacha is Rambam Ilchot Isurei Bi'ah, chapter 22. One may not expound the concealed laws of forbidden sexual relations before 3 students, and we explained it during the session why. In the case 2 of them become involved in a discussion of the halacha and fail to hear their teacher, leading them to issue erroneously lenient rulings. So in general, the whole idea of arayot, it's one of those subjects that involve with a lot of hidden esoteric part of the Torah, and that's one of the reasons why you do not share it in public. So to wrap it up, there are certain manners that people need to fill themselves up before they even enter to that domain. One wants to learn Torah, Mishnah, Talmud, Halacha, Hagigah, and later, when they have all this level of erudition, then can ask to learn the secret part, which is the Bereshit, the chariot, what happened before creation, after creation, etc. All these avenues are not part of the regular manner of learning.
ויחם לשולוים מלאכי השולוים מלאכי